Let me know when, brother.
I will. Setting up your meeting now.
The calm before the storm.
All right, you're good, Aaron.
All right, welcome to the Diving Pod and our coaches roundtable. I'm Aaron Rooney, along with my co-host Heath Calhoun, and this roundtable discussion is sponsored by Sideline Scout, Crossbar, and Cowling Robards. We're gonna go around the horn right away and just have everybody introduce themselves and where you're coaching at, and yeah, we'll go from there. So I guess Heath, we'll start with you, and then we'll go Nick, Josh, Richard, Cliff, John, Drew.
Yeah, I'm Heath, and I'm a co-host of the Diving Pod, and I coach at Clarion, Pennsylvania, for D2 College.
My name is Nick Gaze. I'm the owner of Springboard Creative and a former Division I coach.
Josh, go ahead.
My name is Josh Larkham. I'm at Florida International University, and it's a Division I school in the American Conference.
Hey, this is Richard Marshner. I'm at the University of Utah. Been there for the past 15 years.
I'm Cliff DeVries. I'm the CEO of the Professional Diving Coaches Association, and I coach at Rochester Institute of Technology.
I'm John Fox. I'm the head diving coach at Auburn. Excited to be here.
I'm Drew Johansson, diving coach at Indiana University.
Awesome. So our discussion topic today is just the NCAA in general and the current diving landscape. So Drew, if you would, could you bring people up to speed at home that maybe an overview of what's taken place the last few months and just give you the floor to share kind of the house settlement, potential roster caps, and kind of your viewpoint on everything.
Yeah, to say it most frankly, we're in a transformational period in the NC2A right now. The antitrust lawsuits that the NCAA is facing, they're in an attempt to settle them, and the ball is close to the goal line on that, but not there yet. And what we're seeing in the settlement papers are things like roster caps, revenue sharing with athletes, and it's really going to make a big change in the NC2A at the NC2A level, especially the major conferences, but it'll also affect all conferences and then into junior diving and into our diving world in a big way, depending on how the settlement ends up. And I just want to say, it's been brought to my attention, some of the press that's been put out there that I might be against this settlement. And I have to say that I am not. I honestly believe that this is our best case scenario. We have to figure out how to navigate it. We have to figure out how to exist in it. We have to figure out and be forward thinking about where does diving fit in to this new collegiate landscape that we're facing. Because if the settlement doesn't happen, I think the alternative is far worse. So I do think we need to definitely have a healthy conversation about how best to position diving with us anticipating what the future might hold, and then hope that this settlement goes through sooner rather than later. So it's already leaning into next year a little bit. The settlement was going to be ratified in early September. It's got pushed back. The lawyers have been sent to the drawing board again on a few items. Whether it's going to even be something that we're facing in the 2025-26 season is still unknown. And that affects recruiting. That affects how you manage your squad right now. And so hopefully it'll be settled soon. And I think our discussion tonight should be hopefully talking about how we can position ourselves if the settlement goes through as we think it will to support and strengthen the sport of diving.
Yeah, that's perfect. Excuse me. So as I look at things, to me, there are essentially two avenues for our sport going forward. And you'll have to, cut me off, correct me if I'm way off here. But in my mind, it's stay with swimming and have allocated roster spots for diving, or break away from swimming and be a completely separate varsity sport. Is that accurate? Am I kind of on the right track there?
If that question's for me, we're facing roster spots in both scenarios. If we manage to position ourselves to become a standalone sport in the NCAA, they'll absolutely put roster spots on it, just like they did. Roster spots are for all sports in this settlement. They're for the football players. They're for the basketball players. They're for every single sport in the NCAA, so athletic directors can set budgets. So if we think the best way to position ourselves is to push to become a standalone sport, we'll still face roster spots. If we don't have the time to make that change before this settlement, well, we're facing roster spots within the swimming and diving umbrella.
Sure. To me, it just feels like, that avenue one, staying with swimming, it seems like, how do you see rosters changing in the near future, whether it's numbers, whether it's recruiting, whether it's, how do you see that going forward if we were to just stay with swimming? And this is kind of a discussion for the whole group here. Where are our concerns at as it relates to staying part of swimming and diving?
Can I jump in there? I think part of the concern with staying, I guess, is obviously, like Drew said, that there are roster limits going forward. I think most teams need to prepare for that number of 30. I think the scary part for diving in the short term is that we don't have the ability to advocate for ourselves. We don't really have a voice in the room where these decisions are being made. And I think, so if the number's 30, the number for each team could be 2, it could be 4, it could be 6. It kind of goes up and down, and you're really at the mercy of your swimming coach and the administration about how to go ahead with diving if we remain together. And I think that's something that we're really trying to get some clarity on, is like, for roster management, as Drew said, is like, how many are we going to have? Are we, and I think that swimming and diving, we share the same championship, but I don't think anybody would argue that they are the same sport. They are two distinctly different sports within the same championship, and both should be protected as such within that championship, if it remains going forward. So I think that's, the big concern in staying together, which we've done for obviously decades, and however, since the beginning of time at this, so to speak, is I think from a diving community, we would like to have some sort of assurances that, hey, your diving is going to continue to be supported. And I speak from, I've seen kind of a similar scenario of this here at my own institution in the track and field realm, where throwing is part of track and field. It was felt that throwing was not necessary, and so we don't have throwers anymore at Utah. We don't have shot putters, we don't have discus, we don't have javelin, we don't have weight throw and all that sort of stuff, because the track coach whom I'm friends with, I think he's done a great job. He decided to reinvest in distance for running, but I think that's the fear from diving, is that there could be that decision made at certain institutions, or even to mitigate or to minimize diving's impact. And that's I think the fear or concern, I suppose, with that.
And you mentioned something that I know all diving coaches struggle with, is how do we get our voices heard? How do we get a seat at the table? Is it getting lucky with a swim coach that supports a diving program and they're going to listen to your voice? Or how do we, as diving coaches, approach that situation with a swim coach that might not be as diving friendly and say, hey, will we have something for us? How does that even start?
I'll take that one. I think our professional sports organization that is specific to collegiate swimming and diving, we need to do a better job of having influence in those committees, or we need to have our own professional coaches association really get in the room. And we're talking about the room of the conference commissioners and the NC2A national office. And we need USA Diving to do the same. I know Lee Mashad, I've talked to him a number of times, and we've encouraged him to try to start making those phone calls. But we're not going to be able to influence that kind of change from within the system, even at Indiana University. I report to the athletic director here. I'm fortunate to be in a head coach role. But for me to go outside the chain of command and pick up the phone and call the conference commissioner about this, or to call the head of the NC2A about this would be out of line. And I'd have to report to my immediate supervisor on that one. So not saying that it won't come to the point, but how do we get into the room is we need our professional sports organization to get on board with us. And I think that's probably a great discussion to be had. Where's the representative from the College Swim Dive Coach Association on this call?
One thing that I want to distinguish is that we've got two professional organizations that are here. There's the Professional Diving Coaches Association, and out of the 309 NCAA coaches who are involved with diving at the NCAA level, there's only 35 coaches who are signed up with the Professional Diving Coaches Association. So we have very, very small representation. Most of the membership, we only have 160 members at the Professional Diving Coaches Association, and most of that is made up of club coaches. And so, of course, we want to have a lot more buy-in from the NCAA coaches so that we can go into these meetings and say, listen, we have 300 or all of the coaches represented at the NCAA level, and these are the requests that we have so that we are represented equally within the swimming and diving community. So we would love to have more buy-in from the NCAA coaches who are currently on deck on the swimming and diving programs, and that way we can have more of an overall voice to go into these meetings and say, these are the standards that we feel are appropriate for our sport within swimming and diving. These are the roster sizes that would make swimming and diving a better sport in the NCAA. And then we also have the CSCAA, and that is the other organization that supposedly represents the swimming and diving coaches. But I think everybody sees that there's a deficiency there, and that also has to be increased. And I think we absolutely have to work with them and increase our presence at both of these organizations so that we can have more of a say.
Cliff, I just have to say the College Swim and Dive Coaches Association is the only one recognized by the NC2A and by the major conferences. And they're speaking in front of Congress. I don't know if it's already happened or if it's happening early next week, specific to rallying for our sport. So where the PDCA fits in is, I'm not sure. I know you want more membership, and we would love to join the membership, but I don't know that. I think you're in the same holding pattern that we are as far as getting into any room. The ones that are in the room are at the College Swim Dive Coach Association.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. We don't really have a chair anywhere, and so that is something that we need to work on. Where does our specific group of coaches have a say, and that's what we would like to improve.
All right. I'm going to move on here. So
sorry, Aaron. I just want to, Josh. I think you tried to a couple times. I'd love to hear from you.
You're good. No, you're good. I'm in a weird, I guess, different boat because I happen to have a swim coach that really does care about diving. So I think that does help get into some rooms. He did happen to serve on the CSCA committee a couple times, so like that does help. But I also like try on my end, try to invest. And I think that's going to take some coaches trying to invest and convincing them, hey, they're running the team with swimmers and divers. It's their athletes as well. So it's trying to communicate that going forward and how we can work together. But yeah, I think like Drew said, just the representation at the upper level ranks is just not quite there.
So I have a follow-up to this, and anybody feel free to take this one. Is, do we as a coaching group feel as though the CSCAA does represent the best interests of diving, or do you think we need representation to have them understand our perspective better?
I did the Coaches Academy 2 years ago at the CSCA convention, and I was the only diving coach involved. There was literally me and 14 other swim coaches. And again, I thought it was beneficial as a younger coach. I thought I learned a lot. But most of the track was swimming based. And that's something I went back last year, and it was most of the tracks were swimming based. Diving coaches got together. It was listed as a diving group session, and we just talked. It wasn't really, I mean, there was a few like presentations planned, but most of it was just talking, trying to get experience and advice. And it wasn't like a guest speaker like they had the other swimming guest speakers.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it wasn't until maybe 4 or 5 years ago at most where they even included the word diving in the name of the organization. It was just the Collegiate Swim Coaches Association for a long time. And it took a lot of work just to get them to acknowledge us in title.
We still don't make the acronym.
Yeah, exactly.
And part of the reasoning was because the brand CSCAA was so well established that it couldn't put, CSDCA or something along those lines. That was part of the thing. I would say that the CSCAA is very aware of what diving's concerns are and what I think the needs are. And this is not to discredit them, but I mean, if you're looking at a normal D1 coaching staff, prior to some of the stuff, it's like you would have 5 swim coaches and 1 diving coach. So 86% of your clientele is swimming. So what are you going to look out for? Swimming. And that's, like I said, that's not to fault them. You got to, you don't bite the hand that feeds you in that regards. It's just hard to be able to get our voice heard in that room in a meaningful way. And Josh brought up something too, like even if you have, and you run into this, and I've heard the argument against it, is like, even if you have a swim coach who is supportive of diving and tries to push things along, the return argument from others is like, well, of course you're doing that. You're good at diving. And that's because they invest into it, so that it's always seen as some sort of self-serving thing where it's like, yeah, yeah, of course they're maybe supporting it, but that's because they invest in that. But they don't have the same weight sometimes because they're just looked at as self-serving in some of these regards to help diving out, because it's just, yeah, well, you're good at it, so you're just looking for more points for yourself. And so that's an issue an argument I've definitely run up against in those, even with support of some coaches.
All right. So I'm curious to where everybody here stands. I'm looking at, Drew and John and Richard, all Division I programs. I'm looking at Heath and Josh and Cliff, all either mid-majors, D2, D3. So with the changes that are, likely coming with specific regard to roster caps, how does that affect those other divisions? Are you three, Heath, Josh, Cliff, are you excited about some of these changes? Because maybe some, roster caps at top level programs will help better divers, be more available to your programs? Or, where is everybody at with all of that?
I'll take a minute to speak on this. I think my primary concern with everything we're talking about is our current rosters, our currently committed athletes, and their overall well-being. They, just speaking in regards to Auburn University and how we've recruited and who's coming and who's currently on the roster, those conversations, when they do happen, are going to be very difficult and obviously out of our control but what are we going to do to help them and give them the resources that they need? Because it's going to be a very difficult day. And when D-Day comes, it's going to be a very difficult day. And so I'm very concerned and thinking through those things every day. I don't have any answers. But I do think that there will be a trickle down, right? I would imagine. And that could benefit a lot of diving programs. But how do we kind of get ahead of that for the student athletes is my primary concern. And I don't have any answers.
Heath, are you facing roster spots in Division II?
So at this point in time, we're not. But there was I thought it was a good statement made. We had a coaches connection call, and it was the swim coach from, I want to say Florida Southern. And he's like, why do we keep making changes at the Division II level right now with rules when everything from Division I just trickles down to us sooner or later? So they're like, why don't we hit pause on some of these rule changes and figure out what's about to happen with these roster changes? Because my concern, similarly to John, would be, hey, in the short term, yes, this may have a benefit for us at Division II or III in terms of maybe a higher caliber diver looking to us. But do we just run into the exact same issue your schools may be presented in the next 12 to 24 months where, yeah, I have a roster of 8 men and 8 women, but 3, 4 years from now, I'm told, hey, you have to cut your roster down, and we just go through this whole cycle again. So, um, while my number one focus is the athletes, similar to John, like I just want to see the athletes be successful. I think it provides some unique challenges to look forward after this hits D1. How does it affect D2 and D3 and even mid majors? I think this is I could be wrong, but Josh, does this affect you differently than it does the Power Four now?
Yes and no. So I'm might be a little bit different because I'm a women's only program, so I'm a single gender. So I think that's part of it. To be honest, our roster is 26 right now, so like we're not even at the cap for what that is. So I think for right now, that is not the biggest concern. I think most of it has to do with just like the competing with other big schools for finances, right? Like our football team, our schools in Conference USA going against, Big 10, Big 12, some about like just other conferences that are just maybe having more revenue generated versus us. Now, granted, we do have some things that like worked out in our favor, but that's not the norm. And that's definitely not I don't know. I think with roster cap, especially being a single gender, job security is a little bit different because it's like, okay, like eventually it's might get to a point where, okay, if there is 3 or 4 divers, they might not need a full-time coach. They might make it part-time. So I think that's not that I'm worried about this position specifically, but I think just being in that position not too long ago, I feel like that would probably be my biggest concern right now for other mid-major coaches.
I'd be interesting to find out the answer to these questions. The crux of the antitrust case is that a national organization, the NCAA, which virtually, is the only, in that space, has limited the opportunity for revenue for the kids to get scholarship dollars or even share in the revenue. That's the crux of the whole thing. So Division II mid majors, you guys give scholarships out. Do you have a limitation on? I know Division I mid majors, you're the same as us as far as how many you could give. Heath, does the NCAA limit the number of scholarships that Clarion can give out, or does the institution do that?
Yeah, so we have the NCAA limit. I think it's like 9.9 for women and maybe a little less for men. I probably have those numbers wrong for Division II. At our institution, we don't hit those numbers. We just don't have the budget or the funding needed, so that hasn't hit. But yeah, I think everything trickles down. I think it's going to hit us. I mean, Cliff, how do you see this impacting Division III in the next, near future, long-term future?
Yeah, I kind of feel the same as you, is where we are going to see it trickle down. If there are significant roster cuts at the Division I level, then Division III is going to see that in a year or two. And so we'll feel the pain. Of course, the budget system, I mean, we're not dependent on football. We don't have a football team at RIT. And there's a lot of other Division III programs that may have football, but they still have funds coming out of the general budget instead of directly funneled out of the football program. So yeah, of course, Division I leads all the major decisions, and then everything gets kind of passed down. So we'll see what happens after these major decisions are made.
Cliff, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think do they give scholarships out in Division III?
No, there are no athletic scholarships.
Yeah, so the whole reason for the roster cap is so there's a fair playing field nationally that then allows ADs to budget. And so I think it might trickle down to the mid-majors. It might trickle to the Division II, where they're saying we have a limitation on scholarships, even though the best diving program in Division II hasn't maximized their scholarship budget. It might trickle down there with some roster caps. So then they can say you can give as many scholarships as you, and then that brings them compliant with the antitrust laws. Whereas in Division III, no scholarships, you guys might be able to steer clear of a roster cap. Maybe it'll be your programs that are growing.
Right. We use the same rule book as Division I and II. So if there are roster sizes defined in the rule book, then we will, of course, follow that rule book. So it depends on how things work.
I have a follow-up, and I mean, maybe it's a little bit doom and gloom, and this is primarily aimed here at Richard, John, and Drew. I kind of, the way I see this at this moment in the near future is like, it really hurts you in the Power Four first and the athlete. Like, to me, it's the athlete and the Power Four that are getting hit first. Then it's just a matter of time. Like, am I understanding that correctly? Sorry if that sounds naive or ignorant to the situation, but I feel like that's a good direct question to ask.
Well, I think Josh kind of hit it on. So it is kind of scary. I mean, the big bag beasts of this whole thing is the SEC and Big Ten. The SEC has kind of settled on this 18 people going to conference, divers counting as a full. And kind of, as you said in the, and Drew, you might be able to tell me what the Big Ten's at, but that's kind of, that's
Richard, we're at 23. Just wanted to make, yeah.
So you can bring that to conference. You can bring 23 people to conference.
Yeah, conference.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But the point being on that is like you're kind of limited with that, and I think Josh said it in single genders too. It's like if you're a single gender program and you're at a full, the most divers I can see somebody bringing to SECs or some of these bigger conferences. It's like if you only scored 24 points and you have 16 teams in it. Do the math. Nobody's, you don't need to have 48, 50, 60 divers and it's always usually swim centric. So, all diving coaches have probably done the haggling, so to speak, for that last roster spot. So, this or there. And in our current format, it's that last roster spot for two divers versus one. And so, if you are a single gender, and like Josh said, it's like if is a full-time position for 2, 3, maybe 4 athletes, is that something that that the administration wants to pay or the swim coaches want to pay, or do they want to reinvest sources, elsewhere back into swimming, kind of in the way that, like I said, it happened here with the track and field team. And like I said, that is fully the swim coaches or the head track coaches prerogative to be able to do that right now. And we don't have any protections for that, which is the crux of our position. It's really tough to be able to navigate that without a seat at the table.
That exact situation just happened this past year with NC State. I mean, we saw it firsthand. I don't want to beat a dead horse there, but Renato was one of those divers that absolutely, in our opinions, probably could have made a top 16, maybe a B final, maybe, right? Things could have gone well, things could have gone poorly. We know how diving works, and they decided to take a full roster of swimmers, and that was just the way that they wanted to do it with a top tier swimming program. To score the most amount of points that they thought they could. And It just that argument you just mentioned hit us square in the face just this past season.
I misspoke. We actually take 24 to conference. But no, this is it's very real for me every day. I mean, from recruiting standpoint to just conversations with my athletes, and they're reading and they're curious, and we've just decided to focus on the things that we can control. But it's very real, and we're just doing the best we can with what we got.
All right, so Cliff, I'm going to piggyback off you on this one. You actually posted a really good question on Facebook. Should diving separate from swimming? And that's a conversation I just want to open up to you guys. There's been some sentiment online that maybe we should break away. Maybe that is the best path forward. But I'm really at no position to speak on that. So the floor is yours, gentlemen. Where do you stand on separating from swimming completely?
This is kind of a scary one, I think, for us with our jobs. It's hard to say one way or the other. I mean, I think, with and I served on the NCAA championship committee. I've been pretty active in trying to promote diving with the team event. To go back to kind of the NC State argument, was that a lot of those swimmers from NC State were taken so they wouldn't break up relays. We don't have that option on the diving side, which was part of the impetus for in introducing the team event, so that there's a comparable event that gives certain value to divers that swimmers have always had, and they can do it up to 4 times on a relay, whereas divers, even if the team event comes in, gets 1. I mean, some of my best friends in the world are swim coaches. I've had a ton of support from swim coaches. I love it. And so for me, it's hard personally to think about wanting to separate, because I've gained a lot from very good friends and swim coaches who have supported it. At the same time, I understand that everybody doesn't have that same support. And it's hard to be able to go in there. And like we said, we don't have a seat. I don't have a direct line to my admin. Like Drew said, we got to go through the channels, most of us, to do that. So it's a really tough ask and a tough place to be put in as coaches to really advocate one way or the other. But if we aren't getting help, if we aren't getting assurances that, hey, diving is going to exist with this number of spots or this certain format, then it makes it really hard. It makes it kind of untenable as a sport to keep operating as a sport with 2-3 roster spots potentially. I mean, that's not a team, and that was something with the team. As well, could a team event be 2? I said, no, that's doubles. They call that doubles in tennis. It's not team, So I think it's scary. I don't know that anybody wants to take a hard public opinion on that right now, because certainly we don't necessarily know where everything would go from there, and you'd have to have a lot of things in place to be able to go separate. But I'm of the mind that I think diving, you look at women's gymnastics in the NCAA level. I know you got it down in Auburn. It's huge. It's huge out here in Utah. We put 15,000 people into an arena for it. Diving, to the average fan, is the exact same product almost. We do flips. We just land on our heads in water instead of on our feet on a beam or a floor. To the average person, it's pretty much the same thing. It's spectacularly athletic. We have this drama for extreme failure. We've all seen it. We see it at the Olympics where these crazy things happen. It's got all the components. It's just kind of buried right now in swimming. So I think that's always the tough part is, I personally, and I think all of us would agree, that diving as a sport on its own could be fantastic. But what are the trade-offs? And I think that's what we kind of got to suss out.
I think, I posted that question and I didn't really have an idea of where it would go. And the other thing is that I don't really have a particular feeling one way or another. And I think right now we are in no position to separate from swimming. If we did at this point, we don't have any of the infrastructure available to be able to really perform well at the NCAA level as an independent sport. I think that what we should be doing at this point now is preparing to be able to do that at some point in the future. let's say that these roster spots are eliminated at the Division I level for diving, and we eventually get squeezed out, then I think that we should be trying to do everything that we can so that we can be prepared to be an independent sport if something terrible happens like that. And on the other side of that, I feel that there is a definite ceiling that we are faced with the NCAA right now, where what we are not allowed to have, large rosters on many teams. This is so, there are some schools that have very, very small roster sizes, and again, like NC State, they have very strong swimming, and diving is really secondary, and we're not at the same level of swimming. So there's that tension there.
Well, I'll go on the record as saying I think it would be great if we could separate. That's just plain and simple. And we're facing a short-term problem, and then we're talking about a long-term problem. So I think the best thing for us to do, first and foremost, is we need our own collegiate professional sports organization. Cliff, your plate is way too full. JO is a monster, and that needs to grow because it's been shrinking. We're post-COVID. AAU, USA Diving, that's enough of to deal with right there for the PDCA. To ask the PDCA to also take on the NCAA, I think we need to create a new standalone professional collegiate sports diving association. And then from there, we need to lobby to deal with this short-term problem, which is, hopefully carving out the best scenario, I think, for the short term would be to carve out, to get the conferences and the collegiate NCAA to say, you know what, yeah, here's your 30, and minimum X needs to be diving, and you need to put this percentage towards it. So if you choose to do 26 or 30 or even 34, which is what they say the women can do, and none of this has been ratified. Let's just say we need it to be ratified, or there's a bigger problem in the short term that we're all facing. But assuming it gets ratified, if a school decides their roster limit for swimming and diving is going to be X, they need to say a percentage of it by rule, not by policy, but by rule, should be diving. And then they would allocate those roster spots, that percentage, and they would allocate those scholarship dollars, that percentage, towards diving. And that would kind of stem the tide and see if under that situation, it would be a new world for swimming coaches. If all of a sudden they just, by rule, and it goes a little bit to the ACC model, where they have 3 guaranteed, and then it's 1 for 1 thereafter. It goes a little bit to that model. I'd rather it be a percentage of the resources that the university chooses to allocate, rather than it's a 3 for 3, because in the ACC, maybe Louisville allocates more towards diving than NC State does. And once again, we're being limited by the governing body on the amount of resources that we can give to our student athletes. You drift into that antitrust world again. So I think we should first and foremost work to create a collegiate coaches association, diving coaches association. Nothing against the PDCA, but I think your plate is full. We need somebody whose singular focus is the NCAA, an association that's singular focus, just like the College Swim Dive Coaches Association. Then we have to work to get it recognized. We have to work to get it recognized by the major conferences, and the NCAA Division I, II, and III, as this will be the lobbying force for the diving coaches. And then down the road, I think separation would be the best thing for the sport. How and when, Cliff, I agree with you. I don't know, but I'll publicly say it would be the best thing for us. Certainly works well in the international world, in the USOPC.
I love the call to action. I just love the call to action. We need to get organized. I think that's the main thing I hear from my swim coach friends. You know, they're like, "Hey, we're really organized. Are you guys organized?" No, we're not organized, and there really is no pathway forward until we are. So I love the call to action, Drew. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, and then I think the obvious follow-up is, Drew, what does that look like, getting a collegiate professional organization? How does that process even start?
Great question. I've been trying to figure that out myself. I even floated in a few meetings here. They say it's, multiple years up to a decade. There's a women's initiative of emerging sports in the NC2A that can kind of fast track emerging women's sports. And maybe if we do that, diving men's can be brought along, but we're risking losing men's support that way. It's something that somebody who's not coaching full time should be running an association that devotes all their time to answer that question. And that's why we need a professional sports organization. That's what the College Swim Coaches Association is. Richard, I agree. We do the same things gymnastics does, but they're, probably 10 to 50 times bigger than us in participation in the country. So they're going to fill those stadiums. And that's where the growth of our sport at the youth level, and I think, Cliff, that's the sweet spot for the PDCA, should be where your focus should be. And we could need to talk to the powers that be within our own organization, USA Diving, our foundations, all the people that have traditionally supported diving and want to keep it going, about how do we create a collegiate sports diving coaches association that can be our lobby to the NC2A.
So, and then we had a question in the chat, Drew, and you touched on this. You said you have had discussions with people from USA Diving for them to become more vocal. And the question was from Maria. I think she coaches at RPI, so I think Cliff would probably be pretty familiar with her. She said, is anyone from USA Diving actively involved in these discussions, or has it just been you asking them to be more involved?
As soon as I put it on their radar, Lee made the phone calls. I think they didn't know what was going on for quite a while. You pick up, well, you don't pick up papers anymore, but you look on your phone and you read a headline and maybe 100 words of a news story, and you make an assumption and you move on. Once Lee became aware what the NCAA was facing, and it was as we were becoming aware ourselves, we had no idea this was coming back in January, less than 12 months ago. This only became what this settlement is number one, the need for it. If the NCAA loses a law case, it has to go to court on this. I can only imagine. Or if the settlement gets, anyway, once we became aware of what we were facing, I rang the bell and Lee made the phone calls. Richard, you were out there probably on the front lines seeing it before anybody, being in the committees that you were in. I just think we need to be very thoughtful and get organized. And that call to action, good way to put it, John, is to let's create our own collegiate sports organization that can lobby the NC2A, and let's pack it with powerful people. We know some powerful people. Let's put some influencers on there. Don't put me on it. I'm not an influencer. I'm a diving coach. Put real influencers that love the sport of diving, that want to help us find our way in this new world that we're going to be living in. It's happening. That can help us make a difference, and that can devote the time necessary to answer some of the questions that you just asked. How do we do it? I have no idea.
I'm going to steal one of your lines, John. I know you like to say, when there's change, that just means there's opportunity. You have said that to me a handful of times, but where my brain goes if we talk about a split from swimming is, man, now we're talking about travel. Now we're talking about budget. Now we're talking about logistics, other things that diving coaches, maybe you guys are doing that. And I just don't know all of the background behind it, but it feels like there would be a lot more. And, notoriously, the diving coach position is underpaid and overworked. My question is, can our sport survive on its own? And is that truly an opportunity going forward? If we were to, try to navigate these waters, I guess, on our own, and, being organized with an organization at that level would help. But, where does that go from there? Richard, I see your hand is raised. Feel free.
Yeah, I feel like at least at mid-major, a lot of programs, the diving coach, I know at least 3 or 4 or 5 out here in Zone E that it's like, oh, you're the diving coach. You're doing travel for not just diving, swimming and diving. They do all of that stuff already. And a lot of ours, I've worked with a budget. Mine isn't, I have essentially a diving only travel meets budget that I get worked with. So I think obviously the coaches are able to do that. And from a travel standpoint as well, I think, there's how many dive coaches are having a dual meet. In October where we've been in the water, haven't even gotten optionals off yet. And it's just like, here you go. This is what we do. Because we're different sports. I mean, in swimming, you can jump in the water, you can do your 200 IM. Is it going to be fast? No, it's not going to be fast, but you're not going to get hurt. Diving, you got to go through these progressions, and sometimes we're just forced. Like, I would think there's a lot of appetite for most diving coaches to say, hey, you know what? We're training in the fall. We start our season in January. There's maybe 3, 4 invites. You go to the conference, you have all these things. And so the travel is actually maybe less, and there's not a lot of, it's really hard to do dual meets. It's really hard to get off a plane sometimes. Sometimes you're flying on a plane, you get up at 6 a.m., you get on a plane for 2 hours, you show up at a meet, you do, an hour and a half of touch on the board, and then you do 2 events and fly back. I mean, that's not conducive to good diving. Nobody, so I think we're ready for that. I would think we're ready for that. And I think the model of diving alone, it makes it streamlines things. We don't have to do things under, with swimming. Everything's always fit within a swim meet. On the committee, on the NCAA championship committee, it was always, well, we can do this for diving maybe, but how does it affect swimming? We can maybe try this, but if it affects swimming too much, then no, we can't do that. Hey, can the swimmers warm down in the diving well? Hey, they need a little bit more room to spread out. Those mats that you guys are stretching on, or a dry land room, we need that space. So it's really hard to work on under the current ones for the optimization of our athletes. And I do think we can stand on our own as a sport. I'll go on that record too. I think we can do it. If that's where we need to go, that's where we need to go. I think we can do it. If you build it, they will come. It took 30 something years for USA Gymnastics to get where it is now. 1996 was when the women won the gold medal in Atlanta for the first time. Before that, I was a gymnast, as many of us were. USA Gymnastics wasn't very good. And so it takes a long time, and we got to start laying that groundwork.
One idea that I kind of want to throw out there is something that when I was at the CSAA a few years ago, it was brought up, is having a second season for diving. So have an individual season and then have a second season that would be either in the spring or the fall. And that would be for team event or for synchronized diving. And then that would open up a couple different doors. I have no idea how the logistics would work or how that would be implemented, but it would allow one diver to be a 2-sport athlete, and of course extend the season for diving and give divers a little bit more chance to be on the board throughout their college career.
Sounds like a cross-country team.
Right, exactly. A runner would be able to do cross-country, indoor and outdoor, so they basically count as a 3-sport athlete, even though they're still just running. So it does open up some opportunities. And again, this would mean another season of pay for the diving coaches. And then we could have more time for, an individual championship, more time for a team championship, different events that we could throw in there, a mixed diving event possibly like they're having at the aqua events. So, a lot of different opportunities if we have an expanded schedule and another season.
Cliff, I think that really sounds good for Division III, Division II. But when you're talking about our Olympic aspirations and where our top divers are in the Division I programs, extending their seasons is the last thing we need to do. If anything, we need to shorten it.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I was just going to say my season starts on Wednesday meet-wise, and I'll go hopefully till NCAA's mid-March. So I would personally not like to have it any longer.
And this is exactly where if we had a professional collegiate sports organization could take these in and maybe come to the realization that, yeah, there's a way to better the Division III model, even the Division II model that's different than the Division I model. And start lobbying to make those changes, because that's where we're falling short. That's the lack of organization that we have, and we've just leaned on the College Swim Coaches Association to be our champion, and especially in these times with this huge transformational period that we're facing. Everybody's looking out for themselves.
Yeah, Cliff, if I can piggyback on that, because I think you brought up a great point with the cross country and the 2 track and fields. And then that kind of goes back to Drew's earlier point about the separate, professional organization, the lobbying arm, if you will. Obviously none of us are members of these other organizations for different collegiate sports, but there is one professional coaches association for track and field and cross country. It is a single organization for all of those coaches. So I'm not necessarily saying that, it might not be good to examine. I would be concerned that a separate organization before the sport is fully separated, if that were the route to go, would end up being potentially a death knell to the sport, because we are already battling the swimming side. And if they say, hey, these folks are trying to go out on their own anyway, well, screw them. We're just going to double down on what we're doing and really push them out. And then we're on our own involuntarily without a leg to stand on to try to make something happen. So, is cross country in danger more than indoor track or outdoor track or something like that right now? I don't necessarily believe so. So maybe, that's a conversation we have to have, is what is their organization doing, or another one that is making it function in a way where everybody's getting some equal representation. Another component on the separation thing, we talk about costs. There's already a great example of a small unit team with some inflated costs on management, and that's golf. And we would essentially fall into a very similar category of, 8 to 10 people on a team and, not a ton of travel. We'd actually have less travel than a golf program, because they're spending 4 days for every competition, and they're going to Hawaii and all, wherever to get their stuff in. So we could actually do something that manages that better. Another thing that golf does as well is that they split their season. So they have a fall season with no championship, but they accumulate ranking points and all that kind of stuff. They take the winter off, they come back in the spring, and then they go into their conference championship and NCAAs and all that. I don't know that that's necessarily where we want to go, but again, there are examples out there where we don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel, but we can certainly look at what's working.
Nick, I just want to back up to, the idea that it's a chicken and an egg thing. Should we create a national sports organization to, advocate and then maybe even create a standalone space for diving in the NCAA? Or should we create a standalone space for diving in the NCAA and then create the national sports organization? In my mind, if we can create a credible national sports organization for collegiate diving coaches for the sport of diving, with real influencers involved, then the first thing we do is ask for a seat on the college swimming and diving board of directors with our influencers, not the coaches that have the time to maybe volunteer to sit on their committee meetings, only two of them, that we have organized professionals that are there to advocate for us within the current structure. And then from there, it might grow to, we all get along and stay unified as a swimming and diving event, a sport in the NC2As, or we amicably split. I'm not looking for a revolution. I do think there's a lot of swim coaches that would be happy to say, you know what, this is a headache, and it's difficult for us to continue to have to deal with you. It's difficult for us to continue to do this because you're such a small percentage of the output of the team. Yet we do have a considerable amount of power and influence. So just to speak to the idea of which should come first, the national sports organization or a separate diving, I think we need a national sports organization, even if we don't separate.
Yeah, I don't
more
see,
organization.
I also don't see at least in my seat, I don't see organizing as a threat to this. I don't think that my swim coach is going to see it as a threat through my conversations that I've had with him. And that's just speaking for one swim coach. But, when we're talking about, and he sees the impact that diving is having at Auburn. So again, it could be skewed. But, when we're talking about the team event, for example, he's like, well, I think if you guys were organized, this probably would look different. And, he was really even just advocating for it. So I think it doesn't necessarily have to indicate that we want to be separate. And I'm not sure that we're going to, when everybody gets together as a collective body and those voices are heard, I don't think everyone is going to want to separate. So it's going to be an interesting conversation, but one that definitely needs to be had. And I think if we get organized in a way, there's just so much more merit and so many different pathways forward.
So go ahead.
Put up in this, like you said, change is coming. We can either die by a million paper cuts, or we can take this call to action and do something. Something's going to happen, and I think it's incumbent on us to start doing something on that regards and really work towards a solution. Because otherwise, where we currently are, it will be dictated to us. We are having the terms dictated to us without a lot of say, and so that's nobody wants that. We would like to have kind of self-determination in that, and that's where we're at. Change is coming. I think whether we like it or not, we need to do something to help preserve the sport. And I think the wheels are in motion now.
Very good. So I respect all your guys' time. I'm going to ask one more question, and we'll wrap things up here. We're kind of already at that hour mark, but I saw most of you at Olympic trials, and that's kind of my sending point is the NCAA is very clearly the pathway to the Olympics for diving in the United States. So very open, very broad, but what does our Olympic diving outlook look like, knowing there's changes coming to the NCAA?
I think we should let the head Olympic coach comment.
Yeah, the NC2A is has been the backbone of our Olympic success. We're not the only sport that has counted on the NC2A to build the facilities, create professional coaching opportunities, give scholarships, give food, housing, medical attention, all the things a national training center can give. That's happening, in at least 10 or 20 locations around the country at a very high level between the major conferences. So I think with where this settlement is going and hopefully will end up, won't have the impact it's going to have will probably be, somewhere between, I guessed it was 30, 20, it'll become smaller, but I do think the support will still be there at a very high level. It just won't be in as many programs.
So I have one last question, then everybody is free to go. Is the common thing that I keep hearing from everybody on the call is we have to come together. The call to action is for the coaches to unify, whether it is with a professional organization at the collegiate level, or it is just in general for us to unify. And someone had said it previously, and I apologize for not knowing who it was off the top of my head, is like, we're all looking out for ourselves. Is how do we get this giant group of coaches that all look out for themselves to come together? And I think if I had to guess, most of you are going to say that's the thing we have to figure out. But where does that start?
I feel like it just started. Not that it just started, but I feel like, this is a really good place to be. And I think we came up with some good ideas here. And, the next piece, the way that I kind of am seeing it, Drew, is that we need to find some quote unquote influencers, and get them in a room with some diving coaches.
I'd like to hear from Cliff about the concept of the PDCA has long been the professional sports organization for diving since I joined the sport 30 plus years ago. It's had its ups and downs. It's always been devoted to the entire sport of diving, junior, collegiate, all the way from the top to bottom, high school. So what are your thoughts about a new organization that's solely focused on collegiate diving?
Yeah, so just a little bit of background. So the PDCA was originally formed as an arm of USA Diving to represent the coaches. So we had a seat or two on the board of directors for USA Diving, and all of the bylaws were set up as junior diving, senior diving, and all the positions were based around USA Diving, and so about 5 or 6 years ago, when the membership was basically at zero. At one time, the membership was up to 300, the late 80s, and then membership had dropped off. Stan Randall and I got together and we said, we've got to make it work again. We got to put it together. There's a need for it. And so over the past 5 years, it's grown up to 160 members. So, and I think that absolutely one organization has to work at the NCAA level, and that if that's a separate organization, that's fantastic. And I think, Drew, you're absolutely right that we have to have people who are specifically focused on the NCAA and making sure that the needs of the NCAA diving coaches are being met. And and this isn't for the coaches, this is for the divers. This is, for their academic experience. And so I really feel that the PDCA, the US PDCA as it's formed now, is trying to basically support diving coaches at all levels. And so if there's a separate collegiate organization that is specifically focused on NCAA coaches, I think that would be great. And we would try to support them any way we could as well. But again, having some high-powered people with connections and the ability to make real change at the NCAA level is absolutely needed. And again, the PDCA, as you said, we are being stretched very thin, just trying to make sure that we are pulling in coaches from all levels: junior, AAU, USA Diving, high school, and just setting that up is very challenging. But I think we've got to think football. Just like you said, we've got to come together and work as a team. I think diving is an individual sport. We all grew up in the sport doing whatever we could on our own. And I think we've got to change the mindset, and we've all got to work together as a team. Some people have strengths in one area, other people have strengths in another area, and we've got to work together instead of just trying to do our own dive at our own time. We've got to throw the ball around and get past the goal line.
All right. John, did you have anything else to add?
Well, I put it in the chat. Maybe it's for another time, but just enjoyed being on, and I don't have anything else necessarily to add.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you all for joining us. This was very, very good for a first little rendition of getting together and doing a little roundtable. And this was Heath's baby. He was excited and ready to get some of our best and brightest together to just chat and talk about current issues. And I just thank you all very much for your time this evening.